So I'll start with a bit of background on the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. So they were adopted in 2015 by all of the member states of the United Nations. And there are 17 of them. So they cover about all the fields of social and economic and environmental development. So there is a goal on poverty, on hunger, on health, on education, on gender, on water and sanitation, energy, on decent work, on industry, reducing inequalities, on cities, on consumption and production, climate change, the oceans, nature, peace, justice, and then partnership for the goals. That's basically how to implement them and how to fund them. They have, oh, somebody has drawn on the presentation. Maybe it was me. Anyway, they have a definition of sustainability that I found very interesting because it makes reference to the future generation. So the goals are intended not only for now, but also for later. Before the SDGs, there were the Millennium Development Goals. They were a bit different in the sense that they were only for developing countries, so not for Europe. There were few of them, and they had a main focus on poverty eradication. You can see the agenda, it's quite complex because there are so many goals, but there are even more targets, almost 170, and there are 240 indicators. And the goals are a bit difficult to communicate, so they have been regrouped on around the 5 Ps: people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. Because we're talking about the methodology, so the Millennium Development Goals, they had some issues. For example, some themes were forgotten. For example, migration. It's a very important theme, I think, for many countries today. There was nothing on migration. Or cities. The only thing that was on cities was a target on slum, and it was badly formulated. The SDGs have made a lot of progress on the methodological side, and especially how to formulate targets and indicators. But they have also an inherent contradiction, which is that there's no clear priority. Every goal stands as an own goal. And we've seen that when we achieve economic development, we destroy the environment. So there's this inherent contradiction often between the economic, the social, and the environment. And that is not really clear in the goals, and it's also not solved. There are also issues that could not be included for political reasons. For example, population growth, fast population growth is an issue in some countries, but it could not be included here. Now, if you look at the targets and the indicators and the data behind it, there are quite a few new concepts in the targets of and the indicators of the SDGs. We'll come to that later. And so in 2015, then the UN realized that for a lot of the indicators, there was no clear established methodology. For example, there's a target on public space, on access to public space, but there was no universal definition on public space, and there was no definition on access, and then how to define access to public space. Now UN Habitat has advanced the definition, and the EU has advanced another definition that does not really coincide. So these are the kind of issues that are behind the goals. And also it's immensely difficult to collect all the data, even at the national level for many countries. Even in Europe, there are issues. We'll see that later also. And you can imagine that for developing countries, it's even more difficult. And the reporting is done at national level, so that raises questions on the regional and local level, as Joachim already said. Now, on the implementation, the SDGs are not a treaty, so they're not legally binding, and the reporting is also not mandatory. However, the countries have a regular cycling of reporting. They report every 4 to 5 years, I think, in New York at an event called High Level Political Forum. And because there's no obligation to report, but there's kind of a moral commitment, the reports are called voluntary national reports. And increasingly, some regions and some cities have also started to report at their own initiative, and they do voluntary regional and local reports. And Alice and Paola Proietti will explain this more in detail. There are also other platforms where the reporting, especially at the local level, is done, and I've included a couple of links here. Now, the EU is not a member state, and the EU is also not obliged to report, but they have taken the commitment to do an EU voluntary report that is upcoming. And as Joachim said, Eurostat is also doing annual reporting. And it's quite nicely done, it's quite visual, and it gives a good overview on where the EU actually stands with the implementation of the SDGs. So this is where the little quiz starts. This is the graphic done by Eurostat on the SDG 11, which is the one on sustainable cities. And you can see quite nicely, every indicator has a little graph. You can see where it's going well and where it's not going so well. And this is where you can see, for example, also one of the small inherent contradictions in the goals. If you look at the overcrowding rate on the upper right of the screen, it's improving, so there's less overcrowding. If you look at the lower right on the screen, the settlement area per capita, that's the space that cities take up. And cities are taking up more and more space compared to the population. So that's an issue because of soil degradation and soil sealing. But of course, if you reduce overcrowding, you increase the settlement area. So where you can see these kind of contradictions that are somehow impossible to eliminate in this agenda. Now, I want to hear from you. If you want to guess with just one word, what is an area where the EU is doing best? Knowing that the data I'm using is pre-COVID, because that's the last year. So please unmute yourself and just say one word. What do you which domain you think we're doing best? For example, you can say climate or health or something like that. Just a guess.
Poverty reduction.
Anybody else? JRC people at least?
I read the report, so it's not fair.
What about?
But I will hope, let's say, not having reading the report, I will hope that in energy, the EU will have done good because there are a lot of investments on energy and reduction on.
There was another Annika. Maybe you want to say something? Just a guess. I see also somebody called Andrea, somebody called Christoph. Take a risk.
I guess people.
What was that? Can you repeat?
I guess people.
On people? Yeah.
This is Joachim. I think it might be peace or something like that.
So actually, so Eurostat reports by goals, not by the 5 Ps, but Andrea was the one who hit the jackpot, and also Bernhard, but Bernhard saw the presentation before. So the winner is no poverty. That's where the EU is really doing best. So congratulations, EU. And now I have a guess where the EU is doing worse. Take a risk, say something.
So land and biodiversity.
So on the nature.
Maybe below water.
Yes, on the oceans. Are there any more guesses? Okay.
Climate.
On the climate, yes, it's all going in the right direction. Just Alice was not quite correct. So energy is actually the one where Eurostat says they're doing worse. And I think
yes, that's the point. I know that it's doing worse.
I think
despite the efforts, let's say.
Yeah,
which is alarming, no?
I think we've seen with the current crisis around the situation in Ukraine, but also what this does to the energy supply and the prices. But I mean, Eurostat issued this report already last year. So yeah, energy is an issue. Nature, as was said, is an issue because it's in contradiction to the economic development. And climate was also said, so you're a very good guesser. Congratulations. Climate change is, of course, we're not on the right track. So that was just to evoke it, to wake up a bit your curiosity about the reporting and maybe have a look at the Eurostat website. So the EU is supposed to transpose these SDGs in their policies. And if you read the Eurostat report, it looks very well. But then if you look at the watchdog of the EU, the European Parliament, they're quite unhappy. They say that the EU has only mapped the SDGs, but has not really done proper policy coordination. And also that the lack of doing so has negatively influenced other countries, including developing countries. So if you want to know how your country is doing, you can look it up at the Eurostat. So why is there now a goal on cities? And in the past, there was not. So partially, this is thanks to this lady you see on the screen, Marusha Kardama. So before the United Nations and all of its member states decided on the development goal, there was a whole, let's say, scientific and lobby machinery going on, mainly in New York, but also in Brussels and in other parts of the world, because everybody wanted to have their field of work, their priority in the new sustainable development agenda. So the cities and local governments first thought, well, if we have an agenda on thematic priorities, then this can be implemented at the national and at the local level. But then they realized that if there's no specific goal on cities, they won't have enough visibility, they won't have enough funding, it will just be mainstreamed. And mainstreams often means it will just be. So there was a coalition that was formed. UN Habitat was part of it. There were actually several coalitions. There was a full-time lobbyist, that's this Marusha you see on the screen, and she did a fantastic job. For years, she kept New York going. She organized cocktails, receptions, workshops, seminars, and lobbied governments and other people to convince them of the importance of this goal. And in part, that's why there's now a goal on cities. And you can imagine that for the other goals, it was. That's just the informal background. Now comes the formal part of the city goal. So this is the city goal. So cities and human settlements shall be made inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. So the exact formulation was also a huge lobbying effort and also a very detailed discussion. Which words exactly should be there? And we have seen actually that 1/3 of all the goals can be measured at the local level. The goal on cities has 10 targets and 15 indicators. The targets are on housing, on transport, on planning, cultural heritage, disaster risk reduction, on public space, on air quality and waste management, which is a bit of a double target, on mitigation and climate change, and on support to least developed countries. Here's a list of all the indicators, which can be helpful for your work. If you need to find indicators to put in the project descriptions, you can find them here and also on the website of the UN that is given at the end of the presentation. I won't go through all of them. The SDGs 11 is linked to most other goals. Now, if you look at one indicator in particular, let's look at the one on public space, because I've already mentioned that. So there's an example of the methodology that was defined in a working group of the UN and with other experts, including from the Research Center, how to calculate this indicator. So and then there are like step-to-step guides. So for public space, the first step is to identify potential open public spaces and to put them on a map. Then the second step is to have people on the ground who go there and confirm that this is actually accessible and it's an open. Now, in the definition, it has to be green, but there are some countries that just don't have green spaces. So we say other public space also counts. Then the accessibility was defined by 400-meter walking distance, because that's roughly. So what you have to do is to take the street networks and to draw a line what is accessible by 400 meters along the street network. That's how you get a map, a bit of like this. Then you need to know the population density in this area. For example, from census data. So you can calculate how many people live in this area that you have just defined as having access to this case. And then you compare this population compared to the entire population of your city. So, and the result will be, for example, 70% of the residents of a city have access to public. I've left the calculation of 2 other indicators, but I think it's, I don't think I have enough time to go through this. I've put some of the links where you can look this up. And if you want to go further in detail, there are also UN Habitat has training modules on the different indicators and how to calculate.